Well, as our superheroes are leaving the stage, let's give them one big last round of applause. We'd like to welcome to the podium now our beloved Sarah Bagby, the owner of our favorite luncheon place and bookstore, and also the hostess of many, many, many of our Women for Kansas meetings. And she will introduce our special luncheon speaker.
Jane. Good afternoon. So Kay gave me a wonderful segue into the power of story, and I'm going to introduce to you someone who can tell a story in need of telling. I think all of us in this room, if we've heard the speakers and other people, are not typical of the narrative written about us by those outside our state, by the media, by cultural critics, by people who have never set foot west of the Hudson or east of the Continental Divide. We are so often misrepresented. Another disenfranchised population, also the target of misunderstood rhetoric, is the working poor, both urban and rural. Sarah Smarsh has intimate knowledge of both. Maya Angelou said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." As a young girl growing up in Kansas, Sarah knew she had a story. And as a third-generation daughter of a teenage mother, she aspired to more. She spent 15 years and a lifetime of experience writing her story in a brilliant memoir entitled HEARTLAND, a memoir of working hard, being broke in the richest country on earth. This story existed untold until the publication of this book, Sarah's story. She has elevated her own experience into a narrative that tells the story of a class of people that is overlooked and for whom their story is often told. We live what we know, and once every person in this room has read this important book, what you know about the working poor, some of whom voted for 45, as we just heard, both rural and urban, will change. Be ready to flex even more of your new empathy muscles. By day, Sarah Smarsh is a world-class journalist. Her widely circulated pieces on socioeconomic inequality and the working poor have been published by The Guardian, The New York Times, Pacific Standard, The Cut, and many others. She is a frequent commentator on class issues in the United States and recently was a research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. She is working on a podcast about the working class, about working class America, with a focus on rural issues, so stay tuned for that. HEARTLAND, a memoir of working hard and being broke in the richest country on earth, is her first book. She will be speaking about it, I'm sorry I have to say this, at a boat on September 18th, the official pub date, but we got early copies for this conference. It's her first book. She lives in Kansas. Please help me welcome Sarah Smarsh to the podium.
Thank you to Sarah, one of my heroes as a writer here in Wichita. I live here. I grew up in this area. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. But Watermark Books is just an example of some of the world-class business and entrepreneurship and creativity and vibrancy of this great part of the country that I'm proud to live in. So I grew up 34 miles west of here for the most part on a wheat and cattle farm. I was mostly raised by my grandparents, who left school in 6th and 9th grade, respectively, to work. Because of that experience, which I call my first and most important education, I have devoted my career as a journalist and author to revealing what I know to be true about stereotyped places like rural, working-class Kansas. There are just as many decent, thinking, concerned people there as anywhere else. And election results don't necessarily tell you what people there believe. They tell you, rather, who among them shows up to vote. During the 2016 election, about two-thirds of registered voters in Kingman County, where I grew up, went to the polls. During the 2014 midterms, about half of registered voters did. In today's climate of restrictive voting laws and vigorous voter suppression that disenfranchise poor and minority voters, it is a failure of logic to conceive of entire counties and whole states as red or blue, based on elections in which 30 to 50% of people don't cast ballots. Furthermore, in Kansas and most so-called red states, places called Trump country, 30 to 40% of votes in the last presidential election were for Hillary Clinton. So in my mind, 30 to 40% ain't nothing. That large political minority would grow, I am certain, if people like my family, farmers, carpenters, retail workers, factory workers, cash-strapped single mothers who are simultaneously fed up with our broken system and, believe it or not, utterly despise the racist, misogynist, snake oil salesman currently occupying the White House. If they were empowered and enabled to show up on election day, that political minority I'm talking about would grow. So to be clear, this is a room full of people who work hard, I have no doubt, and have a lot of fire in their bellies. And nonetheless, in these times, we can get tired, can't we? And we've got to think about efficient use of our finite resources. So what I'm saying, to be clear, is I am actually far less interested in trying to convince far-right voters to move in the other direction than I am in tapping into the immense power of Kansas's diverse thousands of people, including many members of the white working class who right now don't vote at all. Contrary to what popular narratives will tell you about the white working class, of which I'm a native, the women and men in my family largely reflect the views of this room, from moderate Democrats and maybe some Republicans to progressives who rooted for Bernie Sanders. But most of them sense their vote doesn't matter, and none of them but me is involved in any sort of civic engagement. But things change. So just last weekend, I attended a small rally at McAdams Park here in Wichita with the Poor People's Campaign, which some of you might be familiar with. It's a national movement begun by Dr. King before his death to reclaim the concept of morality, of right and wrong, from the far right and fight for social justice. McAdams Park, for those of you not from around here, is located in a historically black area of Wichita that has been harmed for decades by strategically segregationist and racist city planning and public policy. The event leader at this Poor People's Campaign event that gathered there last weekend invited the racially diverse group to share why they came. After several others had spoken, I was struck when a 40-ish white guy with a rural twang in his voice, mud on his work boots, and a union ball cap, who was there alone, sheepishly took the mic and said, "I saw this event on Facebook. I had never heard of it, and I was tired of always feeling like I'm sitting there doing nothing." And he told me later that he's a lineman who works on wind turbines out in western Kansas, and he had made a long drive to Wichita to be in solidarity with the Poor People's Campaign. And one of his missions at work as a lineman, he said, is to call out racist and sexist political ideas among coworkers and offer them better ideas. There is much talk about the red-blue divide and the rural-urban divide. I believe the more destructive divide is between those who have the time, resources, encouragement, and information to participate in our democratic process and those who do not. They are often our allies, but by and large, you will not see them at the Women's March or the Take Back Kansas rally. They lack the time. This is my mother I'm talking about right now, by the way. They lack the time, childcare, knowledge, internet access, and social networks that allow for such action. And it's not just logistical, but cultural. You know, so like my family's experience of City Hall is like going in to pay a fine when they couldn't afford to renew their tags. And they walk into this, you know, pristine, shining place with oil on their jeans and mud on their boots, and so some of these spaces are just constructed in ways that culturally we're not even meaning to be in any way prohibitive, but that's how it's experienced. And that's how I grew up, and I know that firsthand. So I'd like to take 5 or 6 minutes to read about how this civic disconnect was so foundational in my life from my book Heartland, which Sarah so generously mentioned in my introduction, and Watermark Books has been, and Sarah specifically, have been great champions of my story and this book in the world. It really bears witness to a lot of the kind of themes of what I was just talking about in more political terms. Here it is at a more personal level. As the 1970s drew to a close, discussion in the United States was all about scarcity of resources, both real and perceived. In 1979 came the second oil crisis of the decade, a petroleum shortage related to trade with the Middle East and America's appetite for the world's fossil fuels. Cars lined up for blocks to fill their tanks, while gas stations raised their prices as the global supply and demand economy dictated. Raise your hand if you remember that. But people in my corner of society were far removed from the national political discussion of that crisis. Their eyes were on immediate concerns. Was the hot combine shaking beneath them running right for the wheat harvest? Was there gas in the car to get to work? Had the cattle been fed? Who would pick up children from the babysitters? That's what my early life felt like, and it's how yours would have felt too, like some invisible hand was making decisions that affected us in ways we didn't have the knowledge to describe or the access to fight. In July 1979, amid a national panic over fossil fuel shortages, President Carter visited Kansas City to promote his new energy program. The night before, he had given a televised speech about the oil panic from the Oval Office, and I bet some of you remember this speech too. Americans were weary and cynical after a couple decades of civil unrest, he said, the assassinations of moral and political leaders, a shameful and bloody war in Vietnam, public revelations about a dirty White House. Carter said the country was experiencing not just an energy crisis, but a moral one. It's clear that the true problems of our nation are much deeper, he said in his Georgia accent, deeper than gasoline lines or energy shortages, deeper even than inflation or recession. Jeannie, that's my mom, Jeannie's third trimester carrying me was the hottest summer since the Dust Bowl. The Wichita area reached 100 degrees for 42 out of 55 days. The heat wave killed 1,700 people across the Great Plains, one of the worst natural disasters in U.S. history. But farmers might be the ones most likely to remember it. The drought shriveled crops and caused $20 billion in agricultural losses. This was 1980. For Jeannie, the summer was one hell of a time to be pregnant. Air conditioning was a luxury she didn't have. That August of 1980, my parents brought me home to a tiny red shack they had rented in the same little community where I'd been conceived, a rural cluster of houses separated by wheat fields and long driveways. Mom stayed with me while Dad went back to work farming and building houses. Mom and I were alone then, with a rotary phone, a cat, and a black and white television. On the TV, local news anchors surely talked about the weather, which my family followed closely, and the upcoming presidential election, about which my family was less concerned. Many of them didn't bother to vote, feeling themselves powerless in a system they suspected was rigged. See, this is not a new thing. People have been feeling that way for a long time, haven't they? Okay. Mom had recently turned 18, though, and intended to wield her new right. In a few months, when the election rolled around, Mom would align with 1/3 of Kansas voters and cast her first ballot for Carter's re-election. But Ronald Reagan won, of course, and got to work cutting taxes. Reagan said that big private money would trickle down to us through the economy, as though we were standing outside with our mouths open, praying for money to rain. Reagan was big on states' rights and deregulation, which appealed to the government-wary streak of my people. Back then, conservatism made some fair claims about keeping government out of people's lives, a noble enough idea in a country that won its independence from an oppressive monarchy. But keeping government out of the private sector could lead to a different sort of oppression, it would turn out. Federal policies that had created a middle class in the 20th century for some were giving way to corporate rule, in which billionaires with political influence could be kings behind the scenes. That same year, 1980, a country singer first recorded a song about the Great Depression with the lyrics, "Somebody told us Wall Street fell, but we were so poor that we couldn't tell." It wasn't the 1930s anymore, but even in my childhood, before cable television and the internet, we lacked understanding of our place in the economy. We were so unaware of our station that in the rare instance when the concept of class came up, we thought we were middle class. The term occasionally got thrown around in the news, and we recognized it to mean not poor, but not rich. Since we had enough to eat, that's how we thought of ourselves. Being conceived a few months after Carter's foreboding speech and born a few months before Reagan's inauguration meant that my life and the economic demise of American workers would unfold in tandem. But we couldn't see it yet out in the Kansas fields. That we could live on a patch of Kansas dirt with a tub of Crisco lard and a $1 rebate coupon in an envelope on the kitchen counter and call ourselves middle class was at once a triumph of contentedness and a sad comment on our country's lack of awareness about its own economic structure. Class didn't exist in a democracy like ours, as far as most Americans were concerned, at least not as a destiny or an excuse. You got what you worked for, we believed. There was some truth to that, but it was not the whole truth. Thanks. The class divide in civic awareness and participation starts early. In 2014, the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement at Tufts University found that social class significantly influences participation in extracurricular activities among high school students. Students from low-income backgrounds, the survey revealed, receive less encouragement and financial help to join clubs and activities, experiences that many other studies have demonstrated shape and predict civic identity in adulthood. In addition to economic status, geographical proximity and access to opportunity shape the teenage experience of civic engagement. In 2016, that same center surveyed 1,000 millennials after the election, and they found that 60% of rural youth, like I once was, live in what they called civic deserts, areas lacking organizations and institutions that enable democratic action, compared with about 30% of their suburban and urban counterparts. My rural school district, Kingman, was relatively close to Wichita, and thus we perhaps fared better than the most remote rural areas in terms of civic opportunity and proximity. Through our high school, the regional YMCA and Optimist Club encouraged participation in an annual model legislature field trip. And so this, some of you might be familiar with this. Basically, high school kids get to go to the Capitol, and they hold elections for particular offices, and they try to pass legislation that they pin themselves. And so I was elected Speaker of the House, and I got to hold that gavel. I got to sit there at the Capitol and wrap that gavel, and I thought, ooh, I like this quite a bit. So my point about that anecdote is, for the first time, coming from where I did, this place, this sense of detachment that I just read to you from my book, and then for me to be sitting in that position and look around, just that brush with opportunity allowed me to feel for the first time like government was something I could touch and change, rather than some amorphous power above the common people. So my wish today is that everyone in this country could have that same feeling. The privilege I have today as a speaker among you, I worked hard to get where I am. Yes, that is true. However, a million blessings for which I can take no credit also shaped my path. And I made a vow a long time ago that I would never take a step up, as we say, the American ladder, without a hand reached out to help someone else make the same step. I ask today that you join me in resisting reductive, simplistic stereotypes about the poor, the rural, and the so-called uneducated among us. To take back Kansas, we must show up everywhere, even the places we're told are against us, and offer the information and assistance that might turn a non-voter into a voter, that might activate apathetic or disillusioned workers into a powerful force for the political rebirth of Kansas. Thank you very much.